The body cam footage was 47 seconds long. That was all it took to destroy Michael Reed's life. 47 seconds of grainy night vision, hallway shadows, and a face so clear, so perfectly lit, so undeniably his, that the first detective who watched it leaned back in his chair and said quietly, to nobody in particular, "Well, that's that." Except it wasn't. Not even close. And the person who had made it look that way was closer than anyone imagined. It was 2:14 in the morning on a Tuesday in late October when Officer Daniel Mercer turned the corner of a residential hallway in Aurora, Illinois, and the camera mounted to his chest captured everything. The timestamp burned into the lower right corner of the frame. The audio picked up labored breathing, his own, and the distant sound of a television still running somewhere in the house. There was blood on the hardwood floor. Not a little. Enough to make the beam of his flashlight catch it and throw it back in dark, wet ribbons toward the wall. He had been dispatched at 2:07, a 911 hang-up. The kind of call that could be anything. A kid who grabbed the phone, a drunk who thought better of it, a woman who changed her mind, or a woman who had the phone taken away before she could finish. Mercer had responded to dozens of those calls over his 11 years with Aurora PD. Most of them were nothing. A few of them were something. This one was the worst kind of something. The front door had been ajar when he arrived. Not open, not broken, just slightly, deliberately ajar, the way a door looks when someone wanted to leave quickly and didn't want the sound of a latch catching to follow them down the street. He had announced himself. He had pushed the door open with the flat of his hand, the body cam recording the slow sweep of the entryway, the coat rack, the small table with a bowl of keys and a phone charger, and the kind of ordinary domestic clutter that makes a crime scene feel obscene. Upstairs, a light was on. He found her in the bedroom doorway, half collapsed against the frame, one hand pressed to her side and the other reaching toward him before he even crossed the threshold. Laura Bennett, 34 years old, dark hair matted against her cheek, eyes open and focusing, which was a good sign. The amount of blood soaking through her shirt was not. She grabbed his arm with a strength that surprised him. Her fingers dug in, and she looked directly at him, not through him, not at the ceiling, not at the middle distance where the dying sometimes fix their gaze. She looked at him, and she said one word with a clarity that the body cam microphone caught perfectly. "Michael." He asked her to stay with him. He called for an ambulance. He pressed his hand over hers at the wound and told her help was coming. And then he heard the footsteps. The camera swung fast when he turned. The hallway. A man standing at the far end, in the space between the bathroom door and the top of the stairs, backlit just enough to throw a shadow but not enough to obscure. He was calm. That was the first thing that registered. Not the face, not the build, but the stillness of him. The way he was standing there like someone who had heard noise and come to investigate, rather than someone who had just stabbed a woman and had every reason to run. Then the body cam light caught him fully, and the camera recorded his face. He held for 1 second, maybe 2. Then he moved, fast, sudden, decisive, and there was the sound of glass shattering, and Mercer was at the window at the end of the hall, and the backyard below was empty and the night was quiet, and Laura Bennett was dying 30 feet behind him. She didn't make it to the hospital, pronounced dead at 2:34 a.m. And by the time the sun came up over Aurora, Illinois, facial recognition software had already done its job. 12 minutes. That was all it took. 12 minutes to pull a match from a database, run it through secondary confirmation, cross-reference it against a federal identity file, and return a name with a 97.4% confidence rating. Michael Reed, 41 years old, founder and CEO of Meridian Systems, a technology firm based in Denver, Colorado, with contracts spanning private sector media, federal defense consulting, and AI development. A face that had been on magazine covers and conference keynotes and the kind of breathless tech journalism profiles that run photographs of their subjects staring thoughtfully at nothing. A face that was, without question, the face in the body cam footage. But that wasn't the part that should have troubled anyone. The part that should have troubled them was how quickly it all seemed to fit. By 6 a.m., Colorado authorities had been contacted. By 6:15, those authorities had begun laughing, in the polite and confused way that law enforcement laughs when they're being asked to confirm something that makes no sense. Michael Reed had not left Denver. His hotel keycard had been used at 1:48 a.m. Mountain Time to access his room on the 14th floor. Conference footage showed him at a podium delivering remarks at 12:59 a.m. Mountain, which was 1:59 a.m. in Aurora, 15 minutes before the Bodycam caught his supposed face in that hallway. And lobby security had him on camera at 2:32 a.m., stepping off an elevator and crossing toward the hotel bar. No private jet, no charter flight, no unexplained vehicle, no gap. He had flown commercial from San Francisco to Denver the previous afternoon, and he had not left. The math didn't work. The geography didn't work. The physics of it, a human body traveling 1,000 miles in no time at all, simply did not work. And yet there was the footage. Investigators who watched it didn't say it could be him or it resembles him. They said, "That's him." The jawline, the hairline, the set of the eyes, the particular way his mouth held at rest. It was Michael Reed in the way that a photograph is the thing it photographs. Two verified truths, both impossible, and someone was lying. Digital forensics came back clean, no edit points, no metadata irregularities, no compression artifacts at the cut points where a spliced video would reveal itself. The chain of custody on the physical device was unbroken. The file hash matched, the timestamps matched. Every technical checkpoint that existed for verifying Bodycam footage had been cleared. Every single one. Then two analysts, working independently, flagged the same thing within an hour of each other. The first was a lighting inconsistency. When the suspect turned his head, that slow, calm rotation toward the Bodycam the moment before he ran, the shadow on the left side of his face moved in a direction inconsistent with the fixed hallway light above him. 2 frames, approximately 1/12 of a second, almost nothing, but enough. The second was audio, the sound of his footsteps, 3 steps on hardwood before the run before the glass, arrived at the microphone in a pattern that was microscopically off from the visual impact. Not because the sync had drifted the way audio and video sometimes drift during compression, because the desync was consistent, a fixed offset, the same delay on every step, as though the audio and video had been generated from slightly different sources and married together with extraordinary precision, but not quite enough. And then there was the satellite ping. It was buried in a cellular connectivity log, the kind of record that exists because Bodycams occasionally connect to cell towers and network relays during recording, a background handshake between hardware and infrastructure. At 2:13 a.m., Mercer's Bodycam had registered a connection to an external signal. Duration, 1.8 seconds. Just long enough to do something, just short enough to almost not matter. The frequency was traced to a satellite relay band used by Meridian Systems. If that was real, if it meant what it appeared to mean, then the footage could have been accessed, altered, and rewritten in near real time. It didn't just suggest tampering. It suggested something more precise than that. It meant that technically the footage could frame anyone. When that detail leaked, and in high-profile cases these things always leak, the narrative assembled itself in real time. Tech CEO with the means and the motive, real-time AI rendering, synthetic facial modeling. A company with defense contracts in exactly the kind of technology that would make this possible. The internet found the theory and ran with it hard, and by the end of the week the question wasn't whether Michael Reed had done it. The question was how. But the federal investigators had more information than the internet and less appetite for a clean story, and one of them couldn't stop thinking about a single question. If Michael Reed had the capability to synthetically overlay a face onto Bodycam footage in real time, an extraordinary capability, one that existed at the very edge of what was technically possible, why would he use his own face? Why create a suspect who was instantly identifiable, instantly famous, instantly connected to a company that happened to specialize in exactly the technology needed to perpetrate the fraud? You don't frame yourself as cover for a murder, unless the point was never to frame yourself. The investigator's name was Sandra Cho, 9 years with the FBI's Digital Crimes Unit, the particular type of patience that develops in people who spend their professional lives looking at things that are almost invisible. She pulled every file associated with the satellite ping and started from the beginning. Not from the assumption that it pointed toward Denver. From the question of where the signal had actually originated. The answer took 3 weeks. And what she found changed everything. The signal had not come from orbit. The frequency was correct. The meridian system's band was correct. But the propagation characteristics, the way the signal spread, the angles, the delay, were wrong for a transmission that had traveled from a satellite. They were right for a transmission that had traveled from the ground, specifically from a range of approximately 200 yards, specifically from somewhere on or near the residential street where Officer Daniel Mercer's patrol vehicle had been parked at 2:07 a.m., a portable transmitter, the kind of device that could spoof a satellite handshake, generate a plausible connectivity log entry, and make a Bodycam briefly connect to an external network for 1.8 seconds, long enough to push a data packet, long enough to inject a face. If this was real, if someone had been sitting 200 yards away with a device in their trunk, it meant the Bodycam hadn't been hacked remotely. It meant someone had been there. On that street. Waiting. Sandra Cho sat with that thought for a long time. Then she requested the warrant. The transmitter was recovered from the trunk of Mercer's patrol vehicle, wrapped in a static bag, tucked beneath a reflective emergency blanket. When forensic technicians analyzed it, it carried trace data consistent with a signal broadcast at 2:13 a.m. on the night of Laura Bennett's death. The device had been in his car the entire time. Now the case turned on its axis, and everything that had seemed impossible became, in retrospect, exactly engineered to seem that way. Daniel Mercer had not always been just a patrol officer. 2 years prior, he had been assigned to a joint federal-local task force dedicated to studying synthetic media threats to law enforcement. Specifically, the ways in which deepfake technology could be weaponized to corrupt or manufacture evidence. The program was serious, well-funded, and populated with some of the most technically sophisticated people working at the intersection of law enforcement and emerging technology. Mercer had spent 14 months in it. He had learned how Bodycam authentication worked. He had learned where the gaps were. He had seen demonstrations of real-time facial overlay systems. He had studied the forensic signatures that manipulation left behind and, therefore, the techniques that minimized those signatures. He had been trained in exactly the expertise required to do what someone had done to the footage from Laura Bennett's hallway. The program had ended abruptly when its funding was reallocated. Mercer had returned to patrol work. No official record of what he had learned, no formal debrief. But Sandra Cho requested the program's full archives, and buried in a technical appendix from the final quarter was a section on prototype field manipulation equipment, portable, concealable, deployable from a vehicle. In the acknowledgments, Officer Daniel Mercer, field testing. He had known what the equipment could do because he had helped build the proof of concept. He had chosen Michael Reed deliberately. Not as a suspect, Mercer knew the alibi would surface within hours. He had chosen Reed as a destination, a place for the investigation to go that was rich with complexity and technical possibility and reasonable doubt. A maze built from legitimate questions about AI, synthetic media, and digital evidence standards. He hadn't planned to see Reed convicted. He had planned to see the case become permanently unresolvable, buried under its own complexity, too tangled for a jury, too technical for a clear verdict. He needed the footage to be unbelievable, not missing, unbelievable. It was, in its terrible way, sophisticated, but there was something he had not accounted for, something small, specific, medical. Forensic video specialists, now working with the explicit theory that the footage had been manipulated, pulled every available video of Michael Reed. Conference presentations, television appearances, investor meetings, product launch recordings, dozens of hours of footage meticulously logged and compared, and in all of it, without exception, they found the same thing. Michael Reed had a mild but consistent facial nerve condition affecting the left side of his face. Partial paralysis, likely congenital, that caused his left eyelid to close incompletely when he blinked. Not dramatically, not in a way that catches attention in normal conversation, but measurably, documentably, present in every frame of every blink across every piece of footage that existed of him. Every single one. Except the body cam footage. In the hallway, in those 47 seconds, the man with Michael Reed's face blinked once before he ran. Both eyelids closed completely, symmetrically, clean. The overlay software had been given hundreds, perhaps thousands, of reference frames of Michael Reed's face. It had learned his features with extraordinary fidelity, but it had learned the average of those features. The statistical regularities, the face as a pattern rather than as a specific person with a specific medical history. It had smoothed out the asymmetry. It had given Reed a perfect blink. Michael Reed had never blinked like that. Not once in his life. That was the moment the case broke. Because you can simulate a face. You can simulate a voice, a jawline, a hairline, the particular way someone's mouth holds at rest. You can simulate almost anything about a person if you have enough reference data and enough processing power and enough time. But you don't simulate imperfection unless you know the imperfection exists. And nobody who built the overlay had thought about a man's left eyelid. 11 months after Laura Bennett died, Daniel Mercer was arrested at his home at 6 a.m. on a Thursday morning. He did not resist. He did not speak. He was charged with first-degree murder and multiple federal counts related to evidence tampering and the use of classified technology outside of authorized channels. The motive, when it fully emerged, was both terrible and mundane in the way that motives tend to be when you've spent nearly a year imagining something more complex. 2 weeks before her death, Laura Bennett had filed a formal complaint with Aurora PD's Internal Affairs Division. Improper conduct during a traffic stop. Specific enough, detailed enough, that if substantiated, it would have ended Mercer's career and likely resulted in criminal charges of its own. The internal review had been in progress at the time of her death. It was suspended when she became a victim rather than a complainant. Mercer had known about the complaint. He had known what it meant. And he had known, because 11 years on the job teaches you these things whether you want to learn them or not. Exactly how to make a 911 hang-up call become a call for service that he alone would respond to at 2 in the morning. He had driven to her house with the transmitter in his trunk and the overlay software loaded on a modified device, and a plan that had probably taken him weeks to build. He had stood in front of a dying woman, and known that the record of him standing there was being simultaneously rewritten, frame by frame, face by face, in a hallway that the camera was faithfully recording and faithfully betraying at the same time. He had believed the impossibility would protect him. He was almost right. Sandra Cho testified at the pre-trial hearing that the margin of discovery was, in her considered professional assessment, extremely narrow. The lighting inconsistency was the kind of artifact that sharpened or disappeared depending on the display you used to watch the footage. The audio desync required specialized tools and a specific hypothesis to detect. The satellite ping was a single log entry in thousands of pages of records, and the blink, the thing that ultimately made it undeniable, would never have been found if the entire investigative apparatus hadn't already been directed at the footage with the specific expectation of finding manipulation. It wasn't the kind of detail anyone looks for. It was the kind of detail you only find when you're already looking at everything. The margin between solved and unsolved was one imperfect eyelid. Michael Reed spent 11 months with his name in the public record attached to a murder investigation. His company lost 3 contracts during that period. His marriage, already under strain, did not survive the additional pressure. He gave a brief statement after the arrest that was widely quoted and widely described as restrained given the circumstances. Something to the effect that he hoped the case would encourage serious thinking about the verification of digital evidence, which was the kind of thing a person says when what they actually feel is too large to speak in public. He returned to Denver and to Meridian Systems, and by most accounts, rebuilt both. But he never gave another keynote without wondering, in some quiet part of himself, whether anyone in the audience was watching the footage or watching him. Whether the face they saw was the face they believed. Whether those were still the same thing. Aurora PD overhauled its Bodycam authentication protocols within the year. New encryption. Real-time hash verification. a secondary hardware confirmation system that flags any external network connection during recording. The technology addressed exactly the vulnerability that had been exploited. A lock built for a door that had already been breached. The federal program that had trained Mercer was quietly reviewed and then quietly not discussed in most of the coverage, which was perhaps understandable and also remarkable, given that the program had essentially provided the blueprint. The people who run those programs are doing necessary work, and the necessity doesn't become less real because someone learned the wrong lessons. But it raises a question that nobody in any official capacity seemed eager to hold for very long. If you teach people where the gaps are, you have to account for the possibility that some of them will use that knowledge in ways you didn't intend. That question remains open. The thing that stays, long after you've processed the facts and filed them in whatever category your mind uses for things that are disturbing but resolved, is not the technology. It's a woman in a darkened hallway gripping a stranger's arm. Laura Bennett was dying, and she used one of her last available efforts to grip the arm of the person she thought might save her and say the name of the person she knew had hurt her. She had no way of knowing they were the same man. She had no framework in which that was possible. She had seen a police officer come toward her, and she had done what people do when they believe they are about to be rescued. The name, she said, had sent an innocent man into 11 months of professional and personal crisis. The name, she said, had, in the end, pointed exactly right. She told the truth. The camera told something else. For 11 months, in courtrooms and newsrooms and federal offices across 2 states, the camera was the more credible witness. Think about what that means. Mercer was one person, working with tools he'd encountered through legitimate channels, applying knowledge he'd acquired in a formal program. And he nearly rewrote what happened in a house in Aurora, Illinois, at 2:14 in the morning. He was caught because of a blink, a single asymmetry in a single eyelid in a single moment of 47 seconds. The difference between a solved murder and an unsolvable mystery was a nerve condition so mild that most people who knew Michael Reed had never noticed it. That is not a comfortable margin. Every day, somewhere, footage is recorded and reviewed and decisions are made and verdicts are reached because a camera was present. The camera, the thinking goes, doesn't lie. The camera is neutral. The camera is the closest thing we have, in the absence of perfect witnesses, to certainty, to the thing that actually happened, as opposed to the thing someone says happened. Except a camera is hardware, and hardware can be reached, and someone who knows how to reach it, who knows what to replace and how to replace it in a way that passes every available test except the one nobody thought to run, that person doesn't need to argue about what happened. They just need to show you what they made. Laura told the truth. The camera told something else. For 11 months, the camera was the more credible witness. Next time, there may be no blink.
So, that's the end of this story, but there are plenty of other great ones right here. Before you go, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring that little bell.